The desert doesn't care about justice. It only cares about survival. For Gemma, a woman running from a lie that had become her death sentence, the scorching plains of the Arizona Territory were a prison without walls. She had nothing left but the clothes on her back, a near-empty canteen, and a single, faded blanket. When a sandstorm drove her into a shallow cave, she found a man balanced on the knife edge of death. He was a stranger, wounded and delirious. That night, she made a choice. She wrapped him in her only blanket, a desperate act of kindness, never knowing that the man she was saving was Caden, the last living chief of the mighty Sand Reavers. The alkaline dust was a living thing. It coated Gemma's tongue, crusted in her eyelashes, and filled her lungs with the taste of pennies and despair. Every step was a calculation of energy she could not afford to spend. Behind her, miles back, was the town of Salvation Creek, a name that now felt like a cruel joke. She had been a waitress at the Gilded Prospect, a simple job, until Sheriff Corbin decided he wanted more than the coffee she served. Corbin was a man built of hard angles and casual cruelty. He ran Salvation Creek not with a badge, but with a ledger of favors owed and threats implied. When Gemma refused his advances, quietly, then firmly, his pride soured. A week later, the saloon's proprietor, Mr. Grantham, accused her of stealing from the till. It was a lie, a clumsy one, but with Corbin smiling behind Grantham, the entire town looked away. Gemma knew what justice looked like in Corbin's hands. It was a loaded cell, a quick trial, and a long sentence, or worse. So she ran. She ran with what she could carry. A loaf of bread, now gone. A canteen of water, now holding only a few precious warm drops, and her mother's blanket. It was the only thing of value she possessed. A heavy quilt, woven with strange, geometric patterns in faded reds, golds, and blacks. It was her last connection to a mother she barely remembered. A woman who had also known the sting of being an outsider. Now, it was her only protection against the cold desert nights. On the third day of her flight, the sky turned a sickening shade of yellow-brown. The wind howled, a physical scream that picked up sand and pebbles, turning the air into a sheet of sandpaper. A sandstorm. Gemma stumbled, half blind, and fell into a crack in the rock face. It wasn't a cave, more a shallow overhang, but it was shelter. She huddled deep, pulling the blanket over her head, and waited. The storm raged for hours. As the wind finally began to subside, she heard it. A low sound, almost lost in the dying gale. A human groan. Peering into the dust-choked gloom at the back of the alcove, she saw him. He was a man, or the broken shape of one. He was native. That much was clear from his high cheekbones and the shock of black hair matted with something dark. He was stripped to the waist, and a ragged, blackened wound wept on his side. He was delirious, his lips cracked and moving, whispering words in a language she had never heard. Gemma's first instinct was pure fear. The settlers and townsfolk spoke of the desert tribes as ghosts, as savages. But this man, he was just a dying animal. She crawled closer. His skin was fire to the touch. He needed water. He needed everything. She looked at her canteen, at the few drops she had been saving. Then she looked at her blanket, her only warmth, her last memory. He shivered, a violent, rattling tremor that shook his whole body. The desert night was already closing in, and the temperature was plummeting. He wouldn't last an hour. "Damn it all," she whispered, her voice rough. She uncorked her canteen and carefully, patiently, let the last of her water drip onto his cracked lips. He swallowed reflexively, a flicker of life. Then, She did the one thing she swore she wouldn't. She unfolded her mother's quilt. It felt like letting go of the last piece of herself. She wrapped it tightly around his shivering body, tucking it under his chin, trying to preserve whatever small spark of life remained. She sat back on her heels, the cold rock already seeping into her bones. She had given her last water and her only blanket to a dying stranger in the middle of nowhere. Gemma didn't know if it was an act of compassion or the stupidest, final mistake of her life. She just knew she couldn't watch him die alone. Gemma woke to a world of absolute silence. The sandstorm had passed, leaving the air clean and cold. Her body ached, a deep, shivering chill that had settled into her marrow. For a moment, she forgot where she was, reaching for the familiar weight of her blanket. Then she saw him. He was awake. His eyes, black and sharp as obsidian chips, were fixed on her. There was no gratitude in them, only a raw, primal assessment. He was an animal in a trap, and she was the thing sitting next to it. He pushed himself up on one elbow, hissing as the movement pulled at his wound. The blanket, her blanket, was pooled around his waist. He had survived the night. "Water," he rasped, the English word sounding foreign on his tongue. I gave you the last of it," Gemma said, her voice small. His eyes narrowed. He scanned the small cave, saw her empty canteen, and then looked back at her. He seemed to be measuring her, trying to understand the logic of her actions. He said nothing. "The wound," she said, pointing. "It's bad," he finished. He looked down at it. The poultice of torn fabric and sand she'd tried to make was a failure. "It needs fire." Gemma recoiled. "Fire? To clean it?" He was already searching, his gaze falling on her small, empty satchel. "You have a knife?" She nodded, pulling out the small skinning knife she'd kept for protection. He held out his hand. She hesitated, then gave it to him. With a grunt, he sat up fully, his face a mask of sweat and pain. He heated the blade's tip in the tiny, flickering flame of the oil tinderbox she'd also carried. Gemma had to look away as he pressed the glowing metal to his own flesh. The smell of seared meat filled the small space. He made no sound, but his entire body went rigid. When it was done, he was pale, but the bleeding had stopped. He handed the knife back, the handle first. "Who are you?" she asked, her fear being replaced by a powerful curiosity. He ignored the question. "They are coming." "Who? Who's coming?" "The men who did this." He shifted, trying to get to his feet. "They track. They will find this place." A new panic seized Gemma. "Corbin? Sheriff Corbin?" The man paused. He looked at her. Truly looked at her. For the first time. "You know this name. He's the law in Salvation Creek. He's hunting me." The man gave a dry, humorless laugh that turned into a cough. "He is not law. He is a butcher. And he is hunting me." As if summoned by his words, a sound carried on the clear morning air. The distant, faint cry of men. The jingle of harnesses. A posse. "Oh, God," Gemma whispered, scrambling to the mouth of the cave. Far below, on the canyon floor, she could see them. 4 riders, moving fast. "We have to run," she said, turning back. The man was already on his feet, though he swayed. "Not run. Hide. They follow tracks. We will leave none." He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. He didn't head for the open desert. Instead, he moved toward the back of the alcove, to a patch of shadow that looked like solid rock. He pushed on a loose boulder, and with a grinding scrape, it shifted, revealing a dark, narrow split in the canyon wall. "This way, now!" He didn't wait for her. He plunged into the darkness. Gemma looked back at the riders, now clearly visible, and then at the black, claustrophobic crack in the rock. With a sob of fear, she grabbed her satchel and followed the stranger into the dark. Her blanket, her mother's blanket, was still clutched in his hand. The passage was a nightmare. It was less a path and more a geological fault line, forcing them to twist, climb, and crawl in near total darkness. The man, whose name she still didn't know, moved with a pained but certain grace. He seemed to know every handhold, every loose stone. Gemma, however, stumbled, her city-bought boots slipping on the smooth rock. He never spoke, but he would stop, waiting for her to catch up, his dark eyes urging her forward. The air grew thin and cold. After what felt like an eternity, a sliver of light appeared. They emerged onto a high, narrow ledge, 1,000 feet above the canyon floor. The posse was a child's toy far below, still sniffing around the cave they had abandoned. The man watched them for a moment, his face impassive. They will not find us here. He slumped against the rock, the burst of adrenaline fading, his hand instinctively going to his seared wound. "We can't just stay here," Gemma said, her heart still hammering. "They'll find us eventually. We need supplies, a doctor." He looked at his side. "No doctor, not for me. But supplies. Yes." He pointed north, across a vast expanse of hostile, broken land. "There is a place, a man, whiskey, Pete. Pete's, the trading post? That's 2 days' walk. 1 day," the man said, "if you know the path." He looked at her, a hint of a challenge in his eyes. "And if you do not slow me down." I don't even know your name," she said, frustrated. He was silent for a long moment. He looked at the blanket he still held, his fingers tracing the geometric pattern. "Caden," he said. "I'm Gemma." "I know," he said. "The waitress from Salvation Creek, the one who stole from Grantham." Gemma's blood ran cold. How do you know that?" "I was in the town," Caden said, his voice low. "In the shadows. I was watching Corbin. I heard the talk. I saw you run." "You were there?" "He is my enemy. He was my destination." His face darkened. "But his men found me first." The journey to Whiskey Pete's was a blur of exhaustion and shared survival. Caden was a different person in his element. He was no longer the dying victim from the cave. He showed her how to find water, a few precious drops weeping from a shaded rock. He pointed out which roots were edible, which snakes were deadly. He was a master of this land she had seen only as a barren hellscape. And Gemma, in turn, proved she was more than a waitress. When his wound, angry and inflamed, began to fever him again, she tore strips from her own petticoat. She cleaned the wound with the last of their water and a bit of whiskey from a small flask Caden had. She was gentle, practical, and didn't flinch. A silent, grudging respect began to form between them. They arrived at Whiskey Pete's trading post under the cover of darkness. It was a ramshackle building, half dug into a bluff, smelling of cured leather, tobacco, and cheap alcohol. Pete, a grizzled old prospector with a beard stained yellow, nearly shot them when they knocked. "By the saints, Gemma," he grumbled, lowering his shotgun. "I heard Corbin ran you out. And who?" he said, his eyes narrowing on Caden. "Is this?" "He's hurt, Pete. He needs medicine. Food." Pete looked Caden up and down. "He's one of them, ain't he? One of the Reavers." "He needs help," Gemma insisted, blocking Pete's view. Pete spat a stream of tobacco juice. "Corbin's been offering $100 for any Reaver, dead or alive. Says they're the ones who massacred that wagon train near the Dry Fork." "He's lying." Caden's voice, weak but steel, came from the doorway. Pete's eyes widened. "He speaks? Well, I'll be. Lying, you say? That's a strong word against a sheriff." "It was Corbin's men," Caden said, leaning on the doorframe. "Dressed as my people. He wanted the land. He... Caden's strength gave out, and he staggered. Gemma caught him, guiding him to a stool. "Pete, please. He's burning up. Just help us. I have no money, but—" "Keep your money," Pete grumbled, but he was already moving, pulling a tin of salve and a bottle of potent-smelling liniment from a shelf. "Corbin's no friend of mine. He's squeezing this territory dry. But you two, you're poking a hornet's nest." Pete looked at Gemma. "That blanket he's holding. Where'd you get it?" "It was my mother's," Gemma said, defensive. Pete squinted at the pattern, just visible in the lantern light. "Huh. That's peculiar. You best be careful, girl. That blanket is louder than you think." "What does that mean?" "It means," Pete said, "that some things in this desert have stories. And that pattern, it's a story Corbin would pay a lot to hear." They rested for a day in Pete's root cellar, a cramped, damp space that smelled of potatoes and earth. Pete, for all his bluster, was a decent man. He brought them jerky and water, and the salve for Kaiden's wound, which was already looking less angry. In the confines of the cellar, the silence was heavy. Gemma found herself staring at the blanket, which Caden now kept draped over his shoulders. "What did Pete mean?" she asked. "About the blanket." Caden ran his hand over the fabric. He was stronger now, his voice clearer. "He meant that this blanket was not made by your people." "My mother gave it to me." "And where did she get it?" Caden's eyes were intense. I don't know. She was a wanderer. She died when I was young. She always had it. She said a kind woman from the Red Rocks gave it to her." Caden's breath hitched. He unfolded the blanket, spreading it between them in the dim light. "This is not a pattern. It is a map. A promise." He traced the black lines. "This is the canyon. This," he touched a red, sun-like circle, "is the heart of the sun. And this," he pointed to a series of small, interlocking gold squares, "is the symbol of the Skywalker. The ally. I don't understand." "My people," Caden said, his voice thick with a grief so profound it made Gemma ache, "were the Sand Reavers. We were the guardians of this territory. We did not own the land. We were the land. Corbin, he is not just a greedy sheriff. He is a land acquisition agent for the new railroad. He is being paid to clear the territory. He offered us a treaty to move us to a reservation." He paused, his jaw tightening. "We refused, so he set his trap. He used the massacre, which his own men committed, as an excuse to hunt us. He chased us for weeks, ambushed us at the dry fork." He folded the blanket, his knuckles white. "I am the only one left. I am the last chief of the Sand Reavers." The air left Gemma's lungs. The man she had saved, the man she had argued with and tended to, was royalty of a dead nation. "The blanket," she whispered. "My mother." "Your mother must have saved one of my people," Caden said. "A kind woman from the Red Rocks. Perhaps my grandmother's sister. This blanket was her payment, her protection. It marked her as an ally. It means she who walks safe. It would have granted her safe passage, food, and water in any of our lands." He looked at her, his dark eyes seeming to see into her very soul. "He did not just hunt me for being a Reaver. He hunts me for what I know. The location of the heart of the sun. He thinks it's a gold mine, the source of our power. He wants to sell it to the railroad." "And is it?" Gemma asked. "A gold mine?" Caden shook his head. "It is a grave. It is a church. It is the sacred place where the history of my people is written on the walls. It is home." and it is where I must go." "Go? Why?" "To hide. To finish," Caden said. "In our tradition, when a chief dies, he must be prepared in the heart of the sun. All of his people must be. Corbin, he left my family, my friends, their bodies for the vultures. I am the last. I must go there to perform the rites, to tell their stories to the stones, so they are not forgotten. It is the only thing left to do." Gemma looked at the man before her, a king with no kingdom, a priest with no congregation, carrying the weight of an entire extinguished world on his shoulders. "Then I'll go with you," she said. "No. It is too dangerous. Corbin is not a fool. He will be hunting me. And now," he nodded at her, "he will be hunting you. Pete said he was asking about the waitress who vanished." "I'm not going back to Salvation Creek," Gemma said, her voice hard. "And I'm not running anymore. That man, Corbin, he took my life. He's trying to take yours. I am the daughter of the woman who was she who walks safe. I will not let the last chief of the Sand Reavers walk alone." Caden studied her face for a long time. Finally, he gave a single, sharp nod. "Tomorrow, then. At sundown, we walk to the heart of the sun." Sheriff Corbin was not a patient man. He sat on his horse, looking down at the empty cave. His best tracker, a quiet, ruthless man named Flint, was kneeling, sifting the sand. "They were here, Sheriff," Flint said, not looking up. "2 of them. 1 heavy, 1 light." "The woman." "The waitress," Corbin spat. "What in blazes is she doing out here?" "And the other," Flint continued, "was hurt. Bled a lot. But he's tough. He walked out of here." Flint pointed to the back of the alcove. "There, a split in the rock, a snake hole. They went through." Corbin slammed his gloved fist into his thigh. "The last Reaver. I had him. I had him wounded, and I let him slip away. And now he's got the girl." "What's so important about this one Reaver, Sheriff?" one of the deputies asked, a new, nervous recruit. "Ain't they all gone?" Corbin turned his cold eyes on the man. "This one Reaver is Caden, their chief, and he's the only one left alive who knows where the heart of the sun is. The railroad pays $50,000 for mineral-rich land. I aim to collect." "And the girl?" the deputy asked. "She made her choice," Corbin said. "She's an accomplice now, a traitor to her own kind. Find them." "Flint, which way?" Flint had circled the area and was now 100 yards up the canyon wall, studying the rock. "They went to Pete's." "Pete's," Corbin smiled. "That old coot. He's been hiding runners for years. This time he's gone too far." When the posse arrived, Pete was sitting on his porch, cleaning his shotgun. "Sheriff," he said, not getting up. "Old man, I'm looking for my fugitive, Gemma, and the Reaver she's with." "Ain't seen 'em," Pete said, squinting down the barrel. Corbin didn't waste time. He nodded to Flint, who kicked the door in. The post was empty. The cellar was empty. "They were here," Flint said, pointing to the ground. 2 sets of tracks heading north. "North?" Corbin was confused. "There's nothing north but the high desert. The Dead Man's Pass. They'll be cooked in 2 days." Pete, still on the porch, let out a small, dry chuckle. Corbin spun on him. "You think this is funny?" "Just thinking," Pete said, "that the high desert ain't nothing to the Reavers. It's their highway. You think you're hunting him in his own land?" "Son," Pete spat, "you're just the sheep being led to the slaughter." Corbin's face went purple. He drew his pistol and backhanded Pete across the face with it, sending the old man sprawling. "You'll show respect. When I find them and I find that gold, I'm coming back, and I'm leveling this shack. You'll be the first one to go." "That gold!" Pete wheezed, wiping blood from his mouth. Ain't what you think it is, Corbin. It's a curse. Then I'll be a rich, cursed man, Corbin snarled. Flint, find them. The chase was on, but Caden and Gemma had a 12-hour lead. They moved at night, Caden navigating the treacherous high desert by the stars. He was weaker, the long walk pushing his body to its limit, but his will was iron. He was a man on a sacred mission. Gemma, meanwhile, was being reborn. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She was no longer a victim. She was a witness. She watched Caden, how he moved, how he read the land. She carried the rifle Pete had given them, and she learned how to use it. On the third night, they stood on the edge of a high mesa. Far below, a hidden canyon split the earth, invisible until you were right on top of it. A thin, silver line of a waterfall tumbled into its depths. The heart of the sun, Caden whispered. It's in there, behind the water. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in blood red and gold, Gemma saw a glint in the distance, far behind them, but coming fast. A mirror, flashing in the sun. They're coming, she said. I know, Caden replied. They followed us, as I knew they would. Let them. The land knows its own, and it is angry. They stood on the edge of a high mesa, the wind pulling at their clothes. Far below, a hidden canyon split the earth, a jagged scar invisible until you were right upon it. From this height, Gemma could hear it before she saw it, the faint, steady roar of water. A thin, silver line of a waterfall tumbled into the canyon's depths, feeding a shocking, impossible line of green in the red rock desert. The heart of the sun, Caden whispered, his voice rough with an exhaustion so deep it was almost spiritual. It is in there, behind the water. Gemma felt a wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled her knees. They had made it. After 3 days of walking, of sharing the last of Pete's jerky, and drinking from rock seeps only Caden could find, they were here. She was about to take a step forward when Caden's hand shot out, not touching her, but barring her path. He didn't need to speak. She followed his gaze, back across the expanse they had just crossed. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in a blaze of blood red and gold, a pinpoint of light flashed in the far distance, a mirror catching the sun. They're here, Gemma whispered, the words catching in her throat. The relief vanished, replaced by a cold, metallic dread. He found us. I know, Caden replied. He did not seem surprised. He seemed resolved. His exhaustion was gone, replaced by the same cold, hard will that had gotten him this far. They followed us as I knew they would. Then we have to run. We have to hide. This is the place to hide, Caden said, his voice a low growl. He thinks he is the hunter, and I am the prey. He has it backward. He is a greedy man, following a trail of gold into a trap he cannot understand. He turned his dark eyes to her, and she saw a fire in them she had not seen before. Let them come. The land knows its own, and it is angry. He turned and began a treacherous, half-scrambling descent down a path that was little more than a goat track. Gemma, her heart hammering against her ribs, followed. The roar of the waterfall grew from a whisper to a thunder. By the time they reached the canyon floor, the sound was a physical thing, a vibration in her chest. The air was cool, humid, and smelled of wet stone and moss. Caden pushed aside a thick, dripping curtain of vines that clung to the rock face directly behind the hammering column of water. It revealed a dark, perfectly round tunnel. This way! Now! He yelled over the din. Gemma plunged after him. The transition was a violent, sensory shock. From the blazing sun and deafening roar, she was instantly plunged into cool, near-total darkness. The sound of the water was muffled, a distant, heavy thump, 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 like a giant's heart. The air was ancient, dry and still. The tunnel sloped gently downward. For 100 feet they walked in darkness, Kaiden's hand a light pressure on her elbow, guiding her. Then she saw it. A faint, golden glow ahead. The tunnel opened up, and Gemma stopped, her breath leaving her lungs in a single, silent gasp. It was not a cave. It was a cathedral. The space was vast, a perfect natural dome that soared 100 feet above their heads. The walls were not rock. They were a solid, unbroken mass of glittering quartz and mica. And in the very center, pointing up like a spearhead aimed at the heavens, was a massive, flawless crystal, the size of a wagon. A single, perfectly round shaft in the ceiling, a natural hole in the top of the mesa, focused the morning sun. At this exact moment, that beam of light, pure and white, struck the crystal. The cavern exploded in light. The gold Corbin was looking for wasn't metal. It was light. The giant crystal acted as a massive prism, fracturing the sunbeam and shattering it in a million directions. The entire cavern was bathed in a spectacular, liquid gold illumination. It was the most beautiful, terrifying, and holy place she had ever seen. "It's beautiful," she whispered, the small sound lost in the huge, silent space. But Kaiden was not looking at the light. He had known this was here. His gaze was fixed, with a terrible, consuming grief, on the walls. They were covered, floor to ceiling, in petroglyphs, thousands of them. The entire history of his people was carved into the crystal walls, drawings of hunts, of families, of births, of stars. It was a library, a tomb. "This is the story," Kaiden said, his voice echoing, hollow and heavy. He walked to the center of the cavern, to the foot of the glowing crystal, and knelt. He touched the stone floor, his head bowed. "And this is where it ends." He began to chant. It was not a war cry, it was a song, a low, melodic, aching song of grief and remembrance. He was singing the names of his family, his friends, the ones Corbin had massacred at the Dry Fork. He was telling the stones their story, so they would not be forgotten. Gemma stood guard at the dark, round entrance, the rifle Pete had given them clutched in her hands. She was a guardian at the door of a temple, a sentinel for a dying nation. Tears streamed, hot and silent, down her face as the last chief of the Sand Reavers sang his people home. The song was cut short by a gunshot. The crack of the rifle was a sacrilege in the holy quiet. The bullet sparked off the crystal wall, inches from Kaiden's head, and the sound of the shot was amplified 1,000 times, a deafening, rolling thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. "Well, well," a voice boomed from the tunnel, polluting the sacred air. "This is a right pretty little setup." Sheriff Corbin stepped into the golden light. He was flanked by Flint, his tracker, and his 2 remaining deputies. His face, slick with sweat from the climb, was a mask of triumph and greed. He stared at the glowing, golden cavern with wide, avaricious eyes. "So that's it," he breathed, his gaze landing on the massive central crystal. "My God!" He walked forward, his boots crunching, and put a gloved hand on the crystal. His smile faded. He tapped it. He ran his hands over its flawless, smooth surface. His face, lit by the golden light, began to twist. It's not gold," he whispered, his voice baffled. Then, louder, his rage building. "It's a rock, a worthless, shiny rock." He turned on Kaiden, his face a mask of purple fury. "You people, you died for a rock." "It is more than you will ever understand," Kaiden said. He rose to his feet. He was not a wounded fugitive now. He was a chief in his sacred place, his eyes burning with a cold, pure hatred. He was magnificent. "I understand that it's worthless," Corbin snarled, his greed curdling into pure spite. "But the land it's on isn't, and I'm still taking it. As for you two, your story ends here." He jerked his chin at his men. "Flint, kill him. I'll take the girl." Flint, the dispassionate tracker, raised his rifle. But Gemma, who had been standing in the shadows, was faster. She fired, not at Flint, but at the wall of glittering quartz above his head. A shower of rock shards and stinging crystal dust rained down, forcing Flint to dive for cover with a curse. "Run!" she screamed at Caden, instinctively moving to shield him. "No." Caden's voice was iron. He didn't run. He bent and picked up a large, sharp-edged stone, a piece of his own broken home. "Not from my home." The cavern erupted in chaos. The deputies, spooked by the unearthly light, the echoing gunshot, and Gemma's sudden attack, fired wildly. Their bullets ricocheted off the walls, screaming and sparking, the sound magnified into an unbearable roar. They were half blind, their shadows leaping like demons in the fractured golden light. Caden moved like one of those shadows. He wasn't a man. He was a spirit of the place, using the giant crystal as cover, disappearing into the dark alcoves carved into the walls, his people's history his only armor. Gemma wasn't a fighter, but she was a survivor. She saw Corbin reloading his pistol, his back to her, his entire focus on where Caden had vanished. She didn't think. She acted. With a cry that was more rage than fear, she charged, slamming her shoulder into Corbin's back with all her weight. He went sprawling, his pistol flying from his hand. He came up with a roar, his face a mask of fury. "You stupid!" He lunged for her, his large hands grabbing for her throat, but a shadow fell between them. "Caden!" He tackled Corbin, and the two men went down, a brutal, desperate tangle of limbs. Caden was a warrior, but Corbin was a brawler, heavy and strong, and Caden was still wounded. Corbin's brute strength won. He landed a vicious blow to Caden's wounded side, drawing a pained hiss. He pinned Caden, his knee on his chest, and groped for his pistol, his fingers closing around the grip. He pressed the cold metal of the barrel to Caden's head. The click of the hammer being cocked was a tiny, sharp sound in the echoing din. "It's over, savage," Corbin hissed, his face triumphant. "No," Gemma screamed. She saw one of the deputies' rifles on the ground, dropped in the confusion. She scrambled for it, her hands shaking, and scooped it up. It was heavy, alien in her hands. She raised it, leveling it at Corbin's broad back. "Drop it, Corbin!" He froze. He turned his head, his eyes full of contempt and disbelief. He laughed, a low, ugly sound. "You won't shoot," he sneered, his full attention on her. So confident was he in her weakness. "You're just a waitress?" The shaking in Gemma's hands stopped. Her vision, which had been a blur of gold and panic, went perfectly clear. She saw the man who had stolen her life. She saw the man who had saved hers, dying beneath him. And she heard her own voice, low, steady, and unrecognizable. "I am," she said, "the daughter of she who walks safe, and you are in her land." She took one, steadying breath, and she pulled the trigger. The shot was an explosion, a profane thunder that shattered the sacred crystalline air. The echo was immediate, 1,000 rifles firing back from the cavern walls. Corbin froze. He looked down at his own hand, still holding the pistol, then at Gemma. Standing 20 feet away, the deputy's rifle held steady in her grip. He didn't register the pain, only the offense. He opened his mouth to laugh, to call her a fool. Then the fire in his shoulder blossomed, a white, hot agony that buckled his knees. He screamed. It was not a roar of command, but a high, thin shriek of betrayal. He dropped his pistol, which clattered with a tinny ring on the stone floor, and clutched his shoulder. Blood, dark and arterial, welled instantly between his fingers. He hadn't been killed. He had been unmanned. You shot me!" he gasped, his eyes wide with a child's disbelief. "You stupid!" He scrambled backward, kicking at the floor like a man trying to escape a snake. "You'll hang for this. Both of you. You'll hang." He staggered to his feet, a wild, cornered animal. His eyes darted between Caden, who was rising, a grim shadow against the glowing crystal, and Gemma, who had, impossibly, not dropped the rifle. "Flint!" Corbin shrieked, stumbling toward the tunnel. "Kill them! Kill them both! That's an order!" But Flint didn't move. He and the two remaining deputies were pressed against the cavern wall, their rifles held low. They were not men of greed anymore. They were men of profound, superstitious terror. They had trespassed. The glittering golden light, which had at first seemed like a promise of wealth, now felt like the eye of God. The air was too old, the silence too heavy, the song Caden had been singing still echoing in their bones. "Sheriff," Flint said, his voice a low rasp, "we should leave. This place, it ain't right. It's a sacred place." "It's a hole!" Corbin spat, blood dripping from his sleeve. "You work for me, not for some savage's ghost. Now do as I—" He put his good hand on the tunnel wall to brace himself, to steady his reeling, pain-filled world. He leaned his full, furious weight against the slick, damp stone at the cavern's mouth, and the land, which had been silent, finally answered. It began not as a crack, but as a sigh. A low, grinding vibration that hummed up through the soles of their boots. Caden, who knew the language of the stone, was already moving, pulling Gemma back toward the crystal. "Corbin, wait!" Flint yelled, taking a step forward. But it was too late. The ledge Corbin was standing on, slick with the waterfall's eternal spray, had been an illusion of solidity. Worn away by eons of water and vibration, it was a thin shelf, and Corbin's rage had been the final straw. With a terrible grinding groan, the shelf of rock under Corbin's feet simply detached. It didn't crumble, it sheared off. A 3-ton plate of stone peeled away from the mountain's face. Corbin had time for one final, wide-eyed look of terror. He didn't shriek, he just opened his mouth. He shot his good arm out, reaching for Flint, for the air, for anything that was solid. He didn't fall. The earth just opened up and took him. The massive slab of rock, and the man on it, plunged into the chasm, swallowed by the roar of the waterfall they had passed behind. A plume of white, pulverized spray shot up from below, and then nothing. The sound of the man was gone. The sound of the water, a deafening, indifferent thunder, remained. Silence descended in the cavern. It was a new silence, heavier, absolute. The 3 men, Flint and the 2 deputies, were carved from stone. They stared at the empty space where their boss had been. Gemma let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Her arms were shaking so badly, the rifle felt impossibly heavy. Caden stood beside her, his hand not on her, but near her, a presence of steady, quiet power. The standoff lasted a full minute. It was Flint, the tracker, the man who read the land, who broke it. Slowly, deliberately, as if not to spook a wild animal, he placed his rifle on the cavern floor. He nudged his 2 men, and they, clumsy with fear, did the same. He unbuckled his gun belt and let it drop. Then he raised his empty hands. We ain't saw nothing, ma'am. Mr. Caden." He was the first to speak the chief's name. "We were tracking," Flint said, his voice hollow, his eyes fixed on the misty void where Corbin had vanished. "We got lost in the storm. The sheriff, he was leading. He got too close to the edge. Must have slipped. A terrible accident. We searched, but there's no finding him. He looked at Caden, his eyes pleading. He wasn't just offering a lie. He was offering a truce. He was begging for the story that would let him and his men walk out of this holy, terrifying place and never ever look back. Caden studied him. His face was an impassive mask, but his eyes were ancient. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Go," Caden's voice echoed. "Stronger now. Tell your story. Tell them the heart of the sun is a grave, not a treasury, and that the land is not for sale." The men didn't need to be told twice. They scrambled, falling over each other, grabbing their rifles but leaving the gun belts. They fled into the tunnel, back toward the world they understood. Gemma heard their boots slipping, their panicked, half-whispered curses, and then they were gone, their sounds devoured by the waterfall. Gemma and Caden were alone. She finally lowered the rifle, her fingers numb. The wooden stock thudded quietly on the stone. The adrenaline drained away, leaving her hollow, her knees weak. She sank onto a low stone, burying her face in her hands, and for the first time, she wept. Not for Corbin, but for the sheer weight of it all. The running, the fear, the shot, the fall. Caden didn't speak. He waited. He let the cavern hold her grief, just as it held his. After a long time, she looked up. The light in the cavern had changed. The sun was higher, the golden beam had shifted, and the crystal was now throwing off hues of soft blue and violet. It was peaceful. "It's over," she whispered. "No," Caden said, his voice gentle. He walked back to the center of the cavern. "Now I finish." He returned to the crystal, to the place where Corbin had interrupted him, and this time Gemma stood with him. She was no longer a fugitive. She was a witness. He sang for hours. As the sun arced across the sky, that single, perfect beam of light moved across the cavern floor, acting as a celestial clock. Caden's song rose and fell with it. He sang the story of his people. He sang the names of his family. He sang his grief. And he sang his hope. He moved from the crystal to the walls, his fingers tracing the petroglyphs, his voice telling the stones the final story of the Sand Reavers. Gemma stood guard at the tunnel's mouth. She watched the waterfall, a silver curtain to a world that no longer felt like hers. She listened to the chant. She felt the rightness of this place. And as the last chief of the Sand Reavers sang his people home, she felt the last of her old self, the timid, frightened waitress from Salvation Creek, fall away. When the sunbeam finally left the crystal, plunging the cavern into a deep, twilight gloom, Caden fell silent. He was empty. He was no longer a chief bound by duty. He was just a man. He walked to Gemma, his steps weary but light. "It is done." They walked out of the tunnel, pushing past the vine-covered entrance, and emerged from behind the waterfall. The roar was cut off, and the world was quiet. It was late afternoon. The high desert air was clean, cool, and sharp. "Where will you go?" Gemma asked, her voice small in the vast open. Caden looked at the world, his world. "I'm the last," he said, "but the story is not over. My people are gone, but the blood remains." He looked north, toward the impossibly distant, blue-toothed mountains. "I have heard whispers of cousins, far away in the high mountains, people who also speak to the stones. I will go. I will find them. I will carry this," he tapped his heart, "to them. The Sand Reavers will not be forgotten." He looked at her, his dark eyes soft for the first time. "And you, Gemma of Salvation Creek?" Gemma pulled her hair back from her face, feeling the sun on her skin. "Salvation Creek is a ghost town. I'm just Gemma." She smiled, the first real easy smile in months. "I think I'll head west. California, maybe. See the ocean. A new land," he nodded. "A new story. Good." He undraped the blanket, her mother's blanket, from his shoulders. It was stained with his blood, with the dust of their journey, with the sacred earth of the cavern. It was a chronicle of their survival. He held it out to her. "No," she said, her hand recoiling. It's yours. It's a map. It protected you." "It protected us," Caden corrected. He folded it with a quiet reverence. "It is a map, and a promise. It promises a safe home." He gently, firmly placed the folded heavy weight into her hands. "Find your safe home, Gemma." She clutched it. It was the only thing she owned in the world, just as it had been days ago, but now it meant something entirely different. He turned to walk away. "Caden!" she called out. He stopped, his back to her, a lone figure against the setting sun. "Thank you," she whispered. He paused, a long, silent beat. He nodded, just once, a gesture of respect that encompassed everything. And then he began to walk. Gemma watched as he crested the hill and disappeared, a living ghost, the last chief of the desert tribes, carrying the memory of a nation with him. Gemma stood for a long time, the heavy, woven blanket in her hands. She was alone, in the middle of nowhere, with no money, no food, and no name. But she was no longer a fugitive, no longer a victim. She didn't know what she was, but for the first time in her life, she was free. She turned, and facing the setting sun, she started to walk. The story of Gemma and Caden is not a tale you will ever find recorded in an official history book. Those books are filled with the names of men like Corbin, men who write history by taking, by conquering, and by force. But this story, this truth, is written in the dust, in the memory of the stones, and in the quiet, unbending strength of the human heart. It reminds us that true justice isn't always found in a courtroom or at the end of a sheriff's rope. Sometimes it's found in the choices we make when we have nothing left to lose. She was a woman who had lost her name, her home, and her future. He was a man who had lost his people, his kingdom, and his past. They were two ghosts, hunted by a world that had no place for them. But in that shallow cave, with a single, desperate act of compassion, the sharing of her only blanket, they found something more powerful than wealth or vengeance. They found a reason. They found the courage to stop running, to turn, and to face the darkness that was hunting them. The desert doesn't care about justice, that's true. But in the end, the land itself replied, and the people who walked it, the ones who respected it, rewrote their own ending. What do you think was the true heart of the sun? Was it the physical crystal in the cavern, or was it the unshakable courage that Gemma and Caden found in that sacred place? These are the kinds of stories we are passionate about bringing to you. The hidden histories, the tales of impossible choices, and the hard-won karma that the history books so often miss. If this story moved you, and if you want to hear more forgotten tales of the real Wild West, please help us tell them. The best way to support this channel is to hit that like button, as it truly helps us. Share this video with a friend who loves a powerful story. And most importantly, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. We have a world of hidden histories just like this one, waiting to be told. Thank you for listening.